Hi, welcome to the Juno Files. I'm Jim Juno, and today I have with me as my guest Noah Diamond. And Noah has a new book out called Gimme a Thrill. It's published by BearManor Media, but also he is in rehearsals for a new play. Well, I say a new play, but it is a restored version of the original Marx Brothers play, I'll Say She Is. Welcome, Noah.
Thank you, Jim. Glad to be here.
So tell me a little bit about the play, first of all. Now, this was an early 1920s Marx Brothers play, correct?
That's right, yeah. Before they ever made the movies that we know them for, the Marx Brothers had this long odyssey on the stage. First they were in vaudeville for almost 20 years, and then they broke through and became part of mainstream popular culture in 1924 when they had their first show on Broadway. It was a revue called I'll Say She Is, and it catapulted them to phenomenal success, and it was the beginning of the Marx Brothers as the phenomenon we would recognize. And it was followed by two more Broadway musicals, The Coconuts and Animal Crackers, which are now quite well known because the Marx Brothers made films of those two shows, and they're also produced on stage all the time. I mean, every year there are several opportunities to see Coconuts and Animal Crackers, but that debut, I'll Say She Is, 1924, was sort of lost to history. It was never revived. It was never filmed. And when the Marx Brothers hung it up for the last time in June of 1925, that was the last time it was ever seen on stage. And I'm a lifelong Marx Brothers, I think obsessive would be a fair word. And the part of the Marx Brothers saga that's always been the most fascinating to me is that golden period in the 1920s when they were the toast of Broadway. And so I've always been very interested in this part of their career, and especially in I'll Say She Is, because of all the things in the Marx Brothers Broadway period, it's the one that's just out of reach, and it's sort of tantalizingly unknowable. And I spent it's been 7 years now of researching it as deeply as possible, and I've excavated enough fragments of it to put it back together and fill in the blanks and produce it again on stage for the first time. We did a couple of staged readings at Marx Fest in 2014, and then it was seen in the New York International Fringe Festival. And now it's a full production for the first time at the Connolly Theater in New York. And we have our first preview May 28th, 2016, as I'm speaking, and it runs through July 2nd.
Fantastic! I tell you, I've read about I'll Say She Is, and I've seen. Well, I guess what many people have seen is that short little review that it was a short film that they'd done in the 30s, and where everybody's pretending to be not Al Jolson, but another singer. French.
Yeah, in the film it's Maurice Chevalier.
Maurice Chevalier, yes. And and then also there was an animated version of the Napoleon scene which aired like in 1970 on TV and has made its way around the internet. So those two items
indeed.
I've seen.
Yeah,
there's
those
a lot
are the
more to
two
it.
parts of I'll Say She Is that we have out there. That theatrical agency scene is something a lot of the hardcore Marx Brothers fans are very familiar with, because indeed they filmed it in 1931 as a promotional short for Monkey Business. It's the scene that begins, "My name is Sammy Brown, and I just came into town." And that was
people say I'm awful dumb.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's great vintage Marx Brothers stuff, but it's not. It's been just sort of canon because it's not in one of their films. It actually dates back to before I'll Say She Is. It was written by Herman Timberg for a Marx Brothers vaudeville tabloid called On the Mezzanine. The Chevalier imitations were added as a tie-in with Monkey Business and with Paramount. But in various incarnations of that scene, they impersonated Joe Frisco or Gallagher and Sheen. And in our version, it is Al Jolson because he's a star of the 20s who's still well known enough for it to be a good reference for the audience.
I was going to ask you that have you had to make any changes to the script for contemporary audiences?
Yes, there are some changes. Some in order to make the show accessible to a contemporary audience, and some for other reasons too. I mean, there are a few things in the original show that would just be offensive today if they were not slightly revised. You know, there's a whole sequence that takes place in Chinatown, and we have that sequence, and we have a lot of what made it so funny, but we've taken out some of the more egregious ethnic slurs in that sequence. And there's also a lot of references. I mean, the original typescript, which was discovered at the Library of Congress, has some topical jokes in it that date back to 1923 and would be sort of abstruse to an audience now. So we've either replaced them with not current references, but more timeless or recognizable references. But it's funny how everything old is new again. The original Alsatias had a joke in that scene, actually, in the theatrical agency scene. There was a joke about Shuffle Along, famous musical review of 1921, which was still a very hot deal in 23 when Alsatias was written. And when we did Alsatias a couple of years ago at the Fringe Festival, it was a foregone conclusion, like, well, we can't do that joke because nobody knows what Shuffle Along is. But now there's a backstage musical about the original production of Shuffle Along on Broadway that George C. Wolfe and Savion Glover put together. And so it's a contemporary reference once again. So it's always worth hanging on to those dated jokes. You never know when they'll come back into vogue.
Everything old is new again, as they say.
Indeed.
So,
yeah.
Now, there are some elements that actually made its way, at least one element did. There was a famous knife-dropping scene that Harpo performs in The Coconuts. And didn't that have its origins in Alsatias?
It actually predated even Alsatias. It was introduced in Home Again, which was a Marx Brothers vaudeville tabloid that was their biggest vaudeville hit, and which they did for many years, starting in 1914. That's when Harpo developed the knife-dropping routine. It was in Alsatias that it really became sort of part of the comedy canon, because every review mentioned it, and it was just, it just knocked Broadway audiences senseless. And famously, Alexander Woollcott was especially taken with Harpo and especially taken with that routine, and so it had a lot to do with putting them on the map. It shows up on film in Animal Crackers.
Animal Crackers, that's what it was, yes.
Yeah, but it's an example of a bit of vintage Marx Brothers comedy that really, in order to really understand what's so funny about it, you have to see it on stage. Because on film, although it's very funny and it works, you're sort of aware of the fact that there are cuts, and his sleeve could have been refilled with silverware at any time. And even if it wasn't, the fact that it could have been just takes a little bit of the magic away. But when you see Alsatias on the stage, and you see an impossible amount of silverware tumbling out of this guy's sleeve, you realize part of what made the Marx Brothers so special, and in that case, what made Harpo so special. His ideas, I mean, just the man's ideas were enough.
Amazing. I always considered him the most, well, I'm going to get into an argument here, not with you, but with Marx Brothers fans. But Harpo, I always thought, was the most talented of the four because he had to do it without words.
Yeah. I think that's true. I mean, it's hard to. Everybody's got a favorite Marx Brother. I always admire people who have Chico or Zeppo as their favorites because they're less common answers. But yes, in the 1920s in particular, and before that too, during the vaudeville years, it's a little bit surprising maybe to contemporary readers and audiences the extent to which Harpo was the star during the stage years. Groucho was also beloved, and critics loved him, and he was much admired. But I think Harpo's whole demeanor and his whole approach to performance was just right on the pulse of the jazz age. the giddy spree that was the 1920s. It was just exactly right for Harpo to break through. Whereas Groucho, maybe you could say that he fully blossomed against the gloom and cynicism of the Depression in the 30s. And so Groucho as kind of the superstar of the act is an idea that comes along a little bit later.
Now, there is a person in this play who was in the original play, rather. Her name was Lotta Miles.
Ah, yes, Miss Miles.
Miss Miles. And she was billed as Carlotta Miles, I believe, in some.
Right.
This was an enigma, wasn't she? I mean, not a whole lot is known about her.
That's right. Yeah, she is really an enigma is exactly the word for it. Yeah, we who love the Marx Brothers and who have been reading, every book about them that we could get our hands on since childhood have always been aware of this kind of, this beautiful shadow out of their history. Lotta Miles, and her name is even sort of a Marx Brothers joke in its own right. Her real name was Florence Rudy, and she was named Lotta Miles by the Kelly Tire Company because she was featured in ads for Kelly Tires, which lasted a lot of miles. And she was neither the first nor the last Kelly Tire girl to be given that name, but she was the one with the audacity to use it outside of her Kelly Tires advertising career. And she was very well reviewed, and I'll say she is. She seems to have been great in the show. But she had a hard time keeping her career going after that, and she had a sort of premature, sort of tragic death in 1937. And and it's very hard to find information about her. But I did find some, and in my book, there's a chapter of my book devoted to her, and it reveals everything that I've been able to discover. She's an interesting character, and I think she shares a little sliver of the Marx Brothers' immortality.
Exactly, and I'm always drawn to the people who we do not know much about, and she was one of my favorites. I'd like to ask you now. How many years did you spend restoring this play?
Well, at this point, it's 7 years. I started working on it in earnest in 2009. For the first couple of years, it was all just research before I was even able to start trying to put a script and a score together. And I got used to saying it was 5 years because it took 5 years to get it from that point to the Fringe Festival, which was the kind of official re-premiere or premiere of this adaptation. But in the 2 years between the Fringe production and this current one, there's been so much more. I've continued to do research, and I've unearthed more material and come up with more ideas, and so it keeps getting longer. It was a 5-year odyssey, and now it's a 7-year odyssey. And when you interview me in another 5 years, I'll tell you, the 12-year restoration of Odyssey. It's really interesting, but the past keeps happening.
Exactly, and like I said, everything repeats itself. So you premiere on May 28th. That's the first preview, and then the official opening night is June 2nd. June 2nd, all right. So, and again, where is it going to be at?
It's at the Connolly Theater, which is in downtown Manhattan. It's 220 East 4th Street. And the show runs Thursdays through Saturdays at 8 and Sundays at 2 and 7 through July 2nd. And it's a historic opportunity to see this lost Marx Brothers masterpiece. It's like getting an early Marx Brothers movie that you've never seen before.
Yes. Now, this is not the end of the interview. Don't hang up on me here, because I want to talk a little bit about.
Oh, I wouldn't think of it. Sure.
Now, the book is "Gimme a Thrill," which
yes.
The story of I'll Say She Is, the Lost Marx Brothers musical, and how it was found. But for the sake of the interview, we're going to call it "Gimme a Thrill."
Yes, we haven't got time. Yes, indeed.
Now, this is by BearManor Media, our good friends at BearManor. What made you decide to write a book about the play, about the rebuilding of the play?
Well, it began as a sort of side project to the stage adaptation. I was sorting through all the research that I have, and at this point I've collected a pretty astonishing amount of material about the original production of Alsatias. But, you know, an awful lot of what I discovered was interesting as background, but it didn't have a place in the script. You know, in fact, when I would find articles about the original production or reviews or recollections of people who were there, usually if I got anything that was material that could be in the show, it was just a little tiny nugget. And those were the rare finds. You know, you go panning for gold. But I also found, of course, a tremendous amount of Marx Brothers history and musical theater history that was not widely known, but that didn't have a place in the actual text. And I sort of had it in my head, like, gee, if I ever wanted to write this up as a prose history, I've already done the hard part, you know, which is all the research. And to just sort of synthesize all that research and tell the story chronologically would just be a pleasure. And it was a pleasure. About the first 2/3 of the book is the history of the original production. It introduces you to the Marx Brothers and where they were at the beginning of the 1920s, as well as the Johnstone brothers, who wrote Alsatias, and Will B. Johnstone, the librettist, went on to write or co-write some of their funniest movies. And so the book introduces you to all of them and takes you through their very unlikely adventure and success with the original Alsatias. And then the second act of the book picks up with me. First, you meet me as a child, obsessed with the Marx Brothers. And then it follows the story of how I put the thing back together.
Wow. So what was, I got to ask you, where was the most interesting place your research took you?
Well, I guess if I had to give one answer to that, it would have to be the Groucho Marx collection at the Smithsonian, which is really just a treasure trove. I had been working on Alsatias for years already, and I was getting to the point where I was finding the same information over and over again. And I thought, well, it may be that I'm hitting a wall here, and I've dug as deep as I can. But when I found myself with Amanda Sisk, who's the director of this production of Alsatias and is my creative partner and also incidentally my wife, she and I went to Washington to look through Groucho's papers. And I knew that would be fun, but I wasn't prepared for how overwhelming it was and how emotional it was. To hold in my hands the actual scrapbooks that Groucho kept in the 20s. And there's an awful lot of material there that it was just not available anywhere else. That, you know, it couldn't find it on microfiche or in any digital archive or in any physical archive. So that, the overwhelming amount of new material there, coupled with the idea that I was touching the pages that Groucho himself had flipped through, that was one of the real pinch-me moments of the whole experience.
That must have been thrilling.
You know, what was difficult about that was just restraining myself to the Alsatias years, because we only had a little bit of time to spend there, and I had to get everything I could from 1925 to 1920, from 1923 to 25. So I had to really be focused, and meanwhile, you know, I'm just surrounded by bins full of, like, the actual index cards from the Carnegie Hall concert and, you know, letters from T.S. Eliot and Dick Cavett and, you know, every notable he corresponded with. I just wanted to live there. I thought, could I live at the Groucho Marx collection?
Now that raises an interesting point. Are you going to be researching and possibly restoring any other Marx Brothers plays?
Right, but maybe I could just make a career out of this, bringing back lost Marx Brothers work. Well, you know, I tell you, I mean, it is an interesting thought. I'm not sure there's anything else in their prehistory that could be restored. And in fact, until I made some progress on it, I didn't think Alsatias could be restored. I really didn't think that there was enough of it to be discovered. I was wrong about that, delightfully. But the other Marx Brothers works that have been lost, I think are, at least at this moment, a lot harder to trace. They had a musical in 1918 called The Cinderella Girl, and it's sometimes called The Street Cinderella. You know, that's an interesting sort of unknown, and it was really their first attempt at a legitimate musical comedy. it was kind of the failed first attempt to do what they eventually did successfully with I'll Say She Is. But Cinderella Girl, as far as I know, there's nothing out there. And, of course, the lost film Humor Risk is an equally or even more frustrating loss. So, I don't know. Robert Bader, who's a world-class Marx Brothers researcher and scholar, has just written a book about their stage years, which is coming out, I think, later this year. And it's possible that Mr. Bader, as is often the case, has found things nobody else has found from the vaudeville years. So who knows, maybe sometime down the line somebody could piece together Home Again or Mr. Green's Reception. But I think I'll Say She Is was the one that we could rescue.
Exactly. Well, congratulations. I always admire people who can delve into history and then restore it. So congratulations on that, and also congratulations on the book and the theater premiere. I hope to make my way up to New York and see it.
Please do. Please let me know. And anyone listening to Mr. Junot's program, if you're in New York at the end of May or in June or at the beginning of July, travel back to 1924 with us. It really is just about the most entertaining thing you could see.
I wouldn't miss it. Well, Noah Diamond, thank you very much today. The book is called
It's a pleasure to talk to you, Jim.
Not a problem. The book is Gimme a Thrill by BearManor Media. The play is I'll Say She Is. It's going to be starting at the Connolly Theater on May 28th. Urge everybody, Marx Brothers fans, just anybody who loves good comedy, to go see it and pick up the book. Again, that's
I'llSaySheIs.com. You can get tickets and the book at I'llSaySheIs.com.
Fantastic. And that's the Junot Files for now.